In 1670 BC, a single father and his 5 sons fled into the Judean desert. With only a handful of followers, they waged a 30-year guerrilla war against the massive Seleucid Empire, and won. They didn't start this fight for political power. They were religious purists, driven to the wilderness to defend their ancient customs against an imperial decree that outlawed their faith under penalty of death. Against all odds, this rebel family, the Maccabees, retook Jerusalem. They cleansed and rededicated their desecrated holy temple, a moment of triumph commemorated to this day by the festival of Hanukkah. Reclaiming the temple was the high point of the rebellion, but it was also the beginning of a profound generational shift. Within a few decades, the internal character of this new Jewish state began to transform. The descendants of those exact same religious rebels slowly morphed into wealthy, assimilated aristocrats. They adopted the very habits and styles their ancestors had bled to destroy. By the time the Maccabean descendants established the Hasmonean Dynasty, they were wearing Greek clothing, using Greek names, and hoarding dynastic wealth. Then came a violation of their founding principles. Ancient Hebrew law mandated strict separation between the sacred role of high priest and the political authority of the king. The Hasmoneans collapsed those boundaries, declaring themselves both. This concentration of power tore Jewish society apart, forcing a religious evolution that defines the faith today. To see how a rebellion loses its soul, we have to look at the start. When the Seleucid king Antiochus IV outlawed the Torah and massacred citizens in Jerusalem, the original Maccabees fought purely for the survival of their traditions. But winning a war is different from running a state. Once the Hasmonean Dynasty took control, ideological purity collided with the pragmatic reality of geopolitical survival. We can see this new autonomy clearly on their currency. This bronze coin, minted by the dynasty, features Hebrew inscriptions and a pomegranate, a traditional temple offering. It shows they had built a fully autonomous, functioning economy. This timeline tracks the leadership of Judea. You can see the exact moment early Maccabean leaders transitioned into the institutionalized role of high priest. Tracking subsequent generations, Jonathan, Simon, John Hyrcanus, their imperial integration is obvious. The population watched their saviors operate exactly like worldly monarchs. Securing the borders and wealth of a physical nation required compromising the strict spiritual codes that justified the revolt. For many citizens, that ideological rift was intolerable. This tension split the population into 2 famous factions. The first was the Sadducees. The Sadducees were the aristocratic elite. They were comfortable navigating Greek culture and rooted their religious lives strictly in the literal, physical rituals of the temple. Their rigid adherence to those centralized sacrifices served a practical purpose. It allowed them to maintain their high-status positions and stay aligned with the wealth and power of the Hasmonean rulers. In opposition stood the Pharisees. Their name translates from Hebrew as the separated ones. Rejecting the corruption of the elites, the Pharisees effectively abandoned the politically compromised temple. They decentralized their faith, focusing on the oral law and applying religious study to the daily routines of common people. This schism was more than a debate over scripture. It was a direct political protest against the moral decay of the Maccabean descendants. Eventually, Hasmonean greed caught up with them. The dynasty began to collapse under the weight of its own internal power struggles, civil wars, and vicious fighting over the treasury. This domestic chaos created a geopolitical vacuum right on the eastern edge of the Mediterranean, and that vacuum attracted the attention of a rising superpower. In 63 BC, the Roman general Pompey marched his legions into Jerusalem, bringing a definitive end to Jewish independence. The Hasmoneans prioritized political control over religious stability, a move that ended in the loss of their sovereignty. Their failure to maintain internal order left the door open for Roman annexation, creating the occupied world of the New Testament. The ultimate test of this fractured society came over a century later. In 70 AD, after a massive local revolt, the Roman army leveled Jerusalem and completely destroyed the Holy Temple. The consequences were absolute for the Sadducees. Because their entire authority was tied to the physical rituals of that single building, they vanished from history almost overnight. The The Pharisees, however, had spent a century preparing for this disaster. Their decision to decentralize their faith into local synagogues and mobile, handwritten scrolls meant their beliefs could survive the destruction of their physical homeland. The Hasmonean political state eventually vanished, but the internal social evolution it triggered became permanent. This era built the resilient, text-centered architecture of rabbinic Judaism that thrives today.